Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's board meeting and our Food for Thought series. The Food for Thought is a speaker series that invites representatives from various local groups, organizations that can share stories and or experiences with diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to raise awareness, invoke change and tolerance within our communities. The format is designed to be a TED Talk type event that allows each presenter an uninterrupted stage to present. The time frame is approximately 20-minute presentation during the beginning of our board meetings. Thank you for joining this session. Annie, can you please introduce our speaker for this evening?
Yes, with pleasure. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I just got some funny feedback. Okay, so I would like to introduce Lavon Sajona, who I know from my women's group, Brave. She's a very brave woman. She is just an amazing person. She's going to tell us about her story, but I just want to mention first, and I'm sure she'll talk about this too, that she grows microgreens. She is a farmer growing microgreens that are just out of this world. Microgreens have up to 40 times the nutrition of mature greens, and they are spectacular. She's a super creative cook with them, and just a delicious farmer. Thanks, Lavon.
Thank you, Annie, and thank you for inviting me to speak in this series. I'm happy to be here. When I was preparing for this, I thought, I was going to get into like my military mindset. I'm a former military. I was going to make this very detailed list and talking points and making certain that I covered every single topic correctly. And then I thought, I think that we all have a story in us. All of us have stories in us. And I think that it would do a disservice to be that regimented and that specific. And so I thought the best way to kind of tell my story would be the way that the woman who inspired me to be here would want me to tell the story. My grandmother was a very intuitive, a very spontaneous, and a very intelligent woman who operated by her gut. She didn't believe in detailed lists. She didn't do any of that stuff. She was very much a gut-driven woman, and she was very much an influence in my life. And she is very much the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So I'm not gonna have a very detailed list or very focused list. I'm just gonna tell you a little bit about me. And then I'm gonna talk about my story. So I'm a 14-year Air Force veteran. I'm from Twinsburg, Ohio, a very small town in northeastern Ohio. I currently am a co-owner of a farm, the Green Anarchist. It's a controlled environment agricultural farm. We currently grow about 35 to 40 different types of microgreens, ranging from the very common ones, radishes, white scallions, to more exotic ones, fennel or dill, aniseed, excuse me. And we are based in Annapolis, Maryland. We partner with U.S. Food Rescue, DC, and we've also partnered with the Lighthouse to provide them with microgreens for their chef program. I am a product of community. That is how I wound up here. That is how I survived. I'm my grandmother's child. So let's talk about my grandmother. She was born in the Low Country in South Carolina. Now, we don't know when she was born. There was no document heralding her birth or welcoming her into the world. Like most Southern folks, she was just born. And she claimed many times that she was only 92. And if you know a Southern woman, you don't get into a comment about their age. If they say they're 92 5 times, you nod and say, yes, ma'am, you're 92, no matter how many times they tell you they're 92. And so that's how we were with her. She could be a disciplinarian, but she could have the softest, most tenderest heart than anyone. But she was born in the Low Country near the rice paddies. And if anyone is familiar with the Low Country, that's North and South Carolina. in an area that is known as Gullah Geechee land. Now, my grandmother swore she was not Gullah Geechee, but I don't know if I believe it. But she said she wasn't, so we're going to go with that. There is a specific language, I can't say it's a specific, it's a mix of West Indian languages that are spoke, or West African languages that are spoken in that region. She understood that language. But she swore she wasn't Gullah Geechee. Just like most African Americans, she migrated from the South to the North. It took her half of her life to leave the South to get to the North. And leaving the South, coming north for most African Americans during the Great Migration was a dangerous trip. Many people did not make it. And I think it's the most modern movement of people I can relate it to is people trying to leave the former Soviet Union. Now, a lot of this is not taught in schools. You just learn that people just showed up where they were and that was it. African Americans were stopped, detained, beaten, killed from leaving the South because they were cheap labor. And all of that labor was moving from the South to the North. So it took her and my grandfather half of their lives to leave that spot and to wind up in Ohio. And they had several different stops that they made on their way to the North. They wound up in a small town, Twinsburg, Ohio, because they heard, and this is placing a lot of faith on what you hear, that they could buy property. Well, they could buy property. There was a Jewish man that had bought Twinsburg Township, and this area sat on top of a hill. And his thought was, his story was, everybody wants to live on top of a hill. So I should be able to sell this to everyone. Unbeknownst to him, everyone in the town knew he was Jewish. And so no one would buy land from him. So being a smart businessman, he pivoted and thought, well, okay, well, who can I sell this to? African Americans leaving the South. So he sold this land to my grandparents. And it was very modest, a modest home, a brick house. They would call it a shotgun house. You can open up the front door and see directly to the back. It was very small, but it was theirs. They owned it. And my grandmother knew how to garden. And my first, most primal memory is the smell of soil, the smell of dirt. And my first memory of seeing her that I can recall is I saw her outside in the backyard. She would be outside with her hoe, digging and chopping. And that's my first memory of her. My grandmother was a resourceful woman, and she, I think she dropped out of school, or maybe the school that she attended ended in like the 8th grade. So she had no formal education, so to speak. She could read and she could write, but she was very resourceful and very gritty. And she would stand in the window and look at the backyard and say that soil was poor. This is very poor soil, poor. And up to a 6 or 7, you have no idea what does that mean? You have no idea. Well, she coordinated with someone to have them bring her a dump truck full of soil, topsoil is what she called it, to dump into our backyard. Now, as a 6-year-old, I'm looking at this mountain of soil thinking, what are we going to do with this? And she says, we're going to level this out. And in my mind, I'm thinking, there's no way we can level it. It's tall. In my 6-year-old brain, this is taller than my house. But we leveled that dirt out. I mean, we worked for days leveling it out. And that was my introduction to labor. My grandmother was a firm believer in work. There was no time for resting. There was no time for napping. There was always something to do. So we leveled this out. And my grandmother knew instinctively, or knew from a culture, how to farm, how to raise things, how to grow things. So she knew how to companion plant. She knew what she needed to put in her soil in terms of composting. She knew this instinctively from her core. She knew these things. She knew what she needed to have in her garden. And so she planted that garden in such a way that it would draw these things. So she knew that she needed bees. She knew that she needed ladybugs. She knew that she needed snakes. And so she would plant this garden to draw this type of wildlife to the garden, which was enormous. And it wasn't just a live space in terms of plants growing, it was a live space in terms of life. There was always something buzzing or always some type of activity over her garden. She knew how she wanted to plant her green beans. She knew that she had to do crop rotation. She knew all of this stuff. Okay, this is stuff that, you know, I had to look this up. I didn't know what that meant. So we had a garden year round and we lived on that garden. But as I said in the beginning, I am a product of community. And so in this little township that I lived in, everyone around me, they were all from the Great Migration, from different parts of the South. And so we believed in bartering. And we also believed in nobody's going hungry. No one, you may not have what you want, but you're not going to go hungry. And so we would feed each other or we would trade with each other. My neighbor across the street had livestock. They grew a lot of corn. And they would trade if they needed tomatoes, we would barter, you know, whatever they needed with what we needed. So we really lived off of the land, and it wasn't a planned way. It was just the way it was. It was just how we lived. My grandmother was also a healer. And again, there was no time for dilly-dallying or you know, wasting time. Every moment was taken up with doing some type of work. So we would go walk in the forest and she would tell us which things to pick. And I remember bone set. I remember poke salad. I remember dandelion. I remember elderberries. We were constantly foraging all the time, drying these things, preparing these things for the year. So this is what my life was like for a year. And again, this is no rest. So school would start late August, early September. And that is when we were towards the end of the summer garden, but the beginning of the winter garden. So you would start school, you would do your schoolwork, you would do your chores, and then you go out in the garden and you would pick things and you would prepare, you know, for your next crop. That will go on from August to probably about December. I have memories of looking in my backyard and seeing collard greens and kale and turnips growing out of the snow. She knew how to make things grow like that. So we had a winter garden and we had a summer garden. So let's get to probably January or February. We're still kind of eating out of this garden. And then there may have been maybe 3 or 4 weeks when the garden was fallow. There was nothing growing. And she would go out and break everything down. Everything would be broken down. And then she'd start planting. So we're still in school and we're still working this garden. And we would plant. So now we're in February of March. We're still getting the garden ready. We're still planting. April, May. Now, when we're headed towards what we think is summer vacation, oh no, there's work to do. So we would have to go out and pick wild straw. We would start with wild raspberries. Then we go to wild blackberries. Then we would go to, as the season progressed, apples, pears. There was always something that you could be picking or foraging all year long. We canned everything. We would can green beans. We would can stewed apples. We would make chow chow. We would make blackberry jam, apple jam, all these different jams and jellies. I had never had store-bought jam or jelly until I joined the military. And I remember like, I want to have Smucker's grape jelly, not having an idea that Smucker's grape jelly was just horrid, but because everybody else had it, I wanted it. So of course we never got it. So you were always cooking or canning or picking or planting all year long, all year long. And, you know, I swore, I'm never gonna have a garden. This God is my witness. I'm never gonna garden again. I'm never doing this. When I get out of here, I'm never having a garden. And as I look back and prepare for this, every place I've been, I've had a garden. Even though I said, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. When I was posted overseas, my first duty station in the Air Force, I was in a small town and my landlord had bees and he taught me how to handle bees. And my initial reaction was, I don't want to touch these things. I'm going to get stung. And he was like, no. And we would go out, he would smoke his bees, and they would kind of get drunk, get sleepy. We would get the honey out of them, and we'd go in the house and we'd have fresh honey. They had hens. I was always around this, even though I thought in my mind that I was not around it. It wound up being in my gravity. I'm not really certain how. It wasn't a conscious thought. So we came back to the States. My first home I bought in Fredericksburg, Virginia, huge yard. I had a garden out there. And then I've moved to Annapolis, Maryland. And this was a tough year for everyone. And for me, I called myself like, I would agro farm. I would get aggravated and I would go out and plant things. And I had planted so many things where we were literally like out of space. And I stumbled upon microgreens and I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is something I can do quickly. This is something that's very healthy. And this is something that doesn't require a lot of space. So I kind of fell into this microgreen farming. But all of that to say is that my grandmother was very much a part of who I am. She still is a part of who I am. I find myself repeating sayings from her. She is in my blood. The people who migrated from the South, all of those people are in my blood. The people that I grew up with, the sense of community, the sense of responsibility for other people is in my blood. That's how I grew up. And I feel like I'm carrying a torch for her. I'm not, I don't have property. I don't have a farm. I'm not the traditional farmer, but I still have that feeling of growing and planting and giving in my blood and in who I am. And so I just want to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to tell my story and to just kind of relive some good memories and to be a part of a community. So thank you for this. This is wonderful.
Thank you so much, Lavon. You really paint such a picture with your words. I could see it. That was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful being here. And it was wonderful just kind of having those memories of her and thinking about, you know, how resourceful she was and the things that she survived and lived through and how we're going to all get through this. We're going to get through it. I mean, she lived through the Great Depression. Her mother was a slave. She got through it. We're going to get through this. We'll get through it. So thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to give just one teeny little commercial about your microgreens, your microgreen business?
Sure. So we grow, I said about 35 to 40 different types of microgreens. Currently, we provide them to, there's a restaurant here in Annapolis called Grapes that we provide them to. And restaurants are being closed, so it's kind of hard to get more clients, more restaurant clients. So what we kind of turn towards individuals. If anybody here has Instagram, my Instagram is The Green Anarchist, and you can see the different ways that we use them. We are really pushing for people to use these at home, to cook at home, to eat at home. They're very nutrient dense. Annie, as you said earlier, I believe it's 10 ounces of broccoli microgreens contain 40% of a mature head of broccoli. They contain 40% of those nutrients. And from that particular standpoint, it means it's a very sustainable vegetable. You don't need a lot of dirt or soil or however you decide to grow them, and there's different mediums. You don't need a lot of space. And because the growing time is only 2 weeks, it's quick. They're very, very quick, but they're very, very nutrient dense. There's been a lot of studies out there on microgreens. I would encourage people to try them. I've sold some to Annie. She loves them. I think you said they were alive, and I love that the way you describe them as being alive, because they're very, very nutrient.
Definitely.
Yeah, and very delicious and very pretty. They're very aesthetically pleasing.
I gotta say the rainbow chard microgreens, they might have been my favorites. Well, I don't know. I think I said that about all of them, but they were gorgeous and delicious.
Well, good. I'm glad you enjoyed them. I'm glad you liked them.
Thank you so much, Lavon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, and thanks everyone. Thank you. Okay, I'm just gonna come out of this meeting, and you guys have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, and
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.